to welcome all of you to this year's event. We have people joining us from coast to coast to coast in Canada and from more than 35 countries around the world, virtually every corner of the world and every time zone. So depending on where you are, it's either good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. But either way, it's great to have you with us. We regret, of course, that we can't meet together in person this year. For all of us, it's been a challenging last few months, and there's a lot of change happening for sure. A lot of opportunities also, and a real need to get together to share the solutions and innovations that I believe we have all found over the last little while. We also need an opportunity to celebrate the projects and teams that are continuing to deliver cutting-edge, transformative infrastructure for communities across Canada and across the world. I would, though, at the outset, like to recognize that there are more than 370 million Indigenous persons around the world. And as a global event, it's important to acknowledge these many diverse and strong Indigenous peoples and communities. I'm currently speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. In particular, I'm located here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, which is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. Here at the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships, we acknowledge that we operate on these lands and have a responsibility to work with the original keepers of this territory. As you know, over the last few months, we've been working hard to pull together a virtual platform to help facilitate the networking opportunities our annual conference has become known for over the past 28 years. I'll also tell you that this is a new experience for us, as it is for so many organizations that are hosting events of this nature. And so I give you a heads up that anything is possible over the course of the next 3 days in terms of glitches that we can't predict, but hope that we'll be able to address quickly in order that we don't disrupt the program that we've worked so hard to put together. Speaking of which, have you stopped yet at the P3 2020 Delegate Directory? It's our networking hub where you can see all who are attending the conference. You can message them and you can set up meetings that you'd like to have one-on-one or in groups. And this directory, I'm proud to say, is brought to you by Export Development Canada, a kind sponsor for this year's conference. We also have this year organized 3 chat rooms where you can meet up with your fellow delegates to keep the conversation going about a session topic or pose a question you'd like to find a solution to. To find these rooms, please click on the menu bar on the top left hand of your screen and go to Networking Chats. If you run into any technical issues, you can live chat with our technical gurus today from 11:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. They can be found under Help in the left-hand menu bar. Just scroll down to the bottom. We'll also host our first virtual wine masterclass at 4:15 Eastern Time this afternoon with Master Vintner Donald Zeraldo. Be sure not to miss this reception, sponsored by Arterra Wines Canada and Wine Growers Canada. And as part of our wine masterclass, we've been asking all of our delegates to answer 3 very simple questions. So we can determine what varietals are your favorites and what experiences with wine have really resonated with you. These questions also can be found on this screen under polls. The questions can be answered at any time today up until 3 p.m. And we're also introducing our new P3 2020 News Desk, which is brought to you by our P3 Diamond sponsor, Aecon Group. And in fact, that's what I'd like to segue to right now. Our first get-together with the 2020 News Desk segment, which will feature folks who have just joined me now on screen. We have with us at the News Nest Mark Bain, who's chair of the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships and a partner with Torys LLP, the Honorable John Manley, the honorary chair of CPPP, and Steve Nakin, executive vice president, concessions at Aecon, and Marie Foley, director of the P3 Advisory BTY Group, and a member of the steering committee of the Women's Infrastructure Network. I'm delighted to have all four of you with us, and thank you for joining us. And now we're going to talk a little bit about a number of issues that are on everyone's mind, I think. We have a lot to discuss, of course. As I mentioned, it's been quite a year, and the impact of climate change, cybersecurity issues, and of course, COVID-19 has dominated the news and dominated our lives, quite frankly. But it's also been heartening to see that governments at all levels and around the world are continuing to recognize that investing in infrastructure is a critical engine for economic recovery. And the majority of governments here in Canada also see infrastructure as an essential service, enabling projects to keep moving forward and workers to stay employed while meeting new health and social distancing standards. So let's do a quick pulse check and see where people feel the sector is at right now. So I'd like to turn, if I can, to Mark Bain first to address what is probably the real thought that's on people's minds. And so I'm wondering, Mark, if you could begin the conversation by addressing what you see as the biggest challenges confronting the infrastructure sector, and has the pandemic revealed about infrastructure soft spots? I'm thinking a little bit here around, I know certainly in the case of Canada, issues around long-term care, rural internet, Indigenous infrastructure. So I'm wondering if you can kick off the discussion, Mark, and then our other News Desk panelists can jump in along the way.
Sure, thanks, Mark. And I mean, it seems now trite to say things like this, but what a difference a year makes. Last year, we were talking really about the stock or the pipeline of projects in the marketplace, lots of linear infrastructure, transit and transport, and still a continued strong suit in healthcare infrastructure. And those projects are still going. And although things might have slowed down in their progress a little bit, those deals are still getting away in this market and are still being advanced. So those continue to be high priorities. It's just a little bit more challenging to get the deals away, I would say, than perhaps a year ago. But the issue you raised, Mark, is a fair one, because with the pandemic, I think we've illuminated, really put in the spotlight some of the underlying weaknesses that have been there all along, but they haven't really been getting adequate airtime. But I mean, they clearly have through the pandemic. So a couple of ones that you mentioned, certainly the remote and rural internet has obviously become a problem now that people are not working from their offices so much, they're working from wherever they live. The digital divide has been exposed, and people are finding there's just not an equitable allocation of resources across the country, and that just has to be fixed. It was a known soft spot, but I think it has become louder and more obvious. We'll hear through the next couple of days some good news on that. Canada Infrastructure Bank having a priority area on it. The federal government with the Universal Broadband Fund putting some more money towards it, and in places like Ontario, the Icon Fund. So that sector is certainly getting more attention. When you shift over to the long-term care space, I mean, there have been a lot of sad stories, of course, of imperfect health outcomes and perhaps some restructuring of that. That's more a provincial than a federal space. And the third one you mentioned, which I hear about a lot, is what's going on with Indigenous infrastructure. So I think through federal, provincial, and territorial attention, I think we'll see a lot more Indigenous infrastructure in multiple ways, projects for the advantage of Indigenous communities, clean water, sort of chief among them, and also projects where there is an economic participation of Indigenous groups that is a more holistic kind of participation. I'm thinking of the Tlicho All-Season Road, the Watay Power Project, and things like that, where there's a different kind of participation. But I would say broadly, I foresee that our market will continue to be strong. We'll change or add some priority areas, and we'll probably add some new and more flexible and more nimble ways to get deals done. So I see our market growing and shifting a little bit.
Thanks, Mark. That's a good scene setter. And I know, Marie, that you've got a few thoughts around this issue too. So I wonder if I can turn the podium over to you for a moment.
Sure. Yeah, we definitely expect to see infrastructure continue very active. Student housing we're tracking right now. We expect that with the change in the demand for single rooms and private washrooms rather than shared rooms, we're expecting to see a lot of those projects. A lot of the projects that Mark mentioned are hanging out there from before, and hopefully it's giving them the attention that they need. Water, clean water is still a big issue for the Indigenous community, and we really need to make sure that we have a focus on that. It also may be a good time to renovate an airport since they're not getting the traffic that they need. It's definitely not going to be for the revenue-based projects, but if you'd already got a project in planning, now might be the time where there's low activity in that space to get a project done.
Interesting times for sure. And you're right. I think that in many respects, the time it's opportune now to get some work done because there is a little bit less traffic, both on the streets for that matter, but also clearly at universities and colleges around the country. John, if I can turn to you for a moment, you've got a little bit of history in the political world, having had quite a career, and maybe most recently as Deputy Prime Minister. And I'm just wondering about your thoughts about the fact that we might be in a period of increasing political uncertainty. And given that, what do you think needs to be done to attract competitive bidding and needed investment around the world?
Well, you're right, Mark. This is an unprecedented period, both in terms of in our human experience. We've never really dealt with a global pandemic before. The last one was before most of us were alive. So this is uncharted territory. But what key to getting a strong economy, the cheapest form of stimulus that a government can find is business confidence. So when you cite the uncertainty, that's actually the biggest threat that we have. So what policymakers need to be doing now is sending very clear messages, making sure that they get the sequence between fighting the pandemic and enabling the economy to begin taking new routes and rebuild, getting that right. And building that confidence. An economy it's the sum total of millions and millions of discrete decisions being made every day by investors, by consumers, by businesses, by policymakers, by nonprofit organizations. And to move those decisions in a way that will reinstill confidence and get investment flowing again is what the objectives of our policymakers needs to be, and I believe it is.
Big challenges, I think, though, around the world, because there is at the same time this need to invest, but the realities of the fiscal situation. But at the same time, citizens everywhere want infrastructure built better, faster, cheaper. So it really puts the onus on political leaders everywhere to try to address what are very critical issues. Steve, if I can turn to you for a moment. I know we've been talking for a while about COVID-19. There have been some really interesting developments over the last couple of days, discussions around vaccines that are almost ready to come to market. And I'm just wondering whether, from your perspective, you think that we're maybe at the beginning of the end, or for that matter, at the end of the beginning of COVID-19. And I'm wondering that as and when governments pivot from managing the health and financial crises to economic stimulus, what will become the new normal and how long will it take to get there?
Oh, thanks for that, Mark. I am an optimist. And so I have to go with we're at the beginning of the end option there out of the two. And I think that the vaccine, the news of the vaccine that we all received in recent days is obviously a game changer. and comes at a critical time when people are feeling really fatigued and frustrated and tired of being locked up. Just to pick up on the theme that John mentioned, business confidence. That is the essence of it, and I think that this vaccine, or the news of the vaccine, will have a very powerful, positive psychological impact on people. It will calm nerves. It will potentially serve, hopefully, as a catalyst to generate some momentum, and maybe if we're not too far from where we were in March, we can pick things up where we left off through generating some business confidence. As for the new normal, if I never hear that phrase again, it will be too soon. I think we're all sick of it, and because there's nothing normal about it, right? Really, what I would advocate for is the old normal. The speed of our recovery depends on using sort of tried and tested methods, not trying to invent the wheel with notions that things have changed irrevocably. They haven't. We're all terribly shaken, but we really are dying to return to what we know. So I think, going back to the things that we know work quickly as soon as we can is really how we get this thing going again. And of course, that includes P3s, because we know that's a great way to get things moving.
That's actually a great segue to the P3 question. And I'm just wondering what our panelists think about the future of P3s, and whether there are any concerns out there on the horizon, or whether in fact there are opportunities and the prospects are looking promising going forward.
Mark, let me jump on that, because from a financing perspective, what we've seen during this pandemic in pretty much every developed country, including Canada and the United States, is very vigorous spending, fiscal spending on the part of governments, and much of that being financed by central banks. The Bank of Canada, which didn't expand its balance sheet during the 2008-09 financial crisis, has done so this time with very little repercussion. Interest rates are low, governments are borrowing and spending. But there is a day coming. It's not tomorrow. It may not be next March, when governments are going to recognize that they're approaching their limits. And that confidence, that elusive but fundamentally required element, is going to require that they begin to show what their fiscal anchors are and how they're going to return to them. And that's going to mean that in doing many of these projects that we talk about at this conference, increasing inflow of private sector funding is going to be necessary as governments feel the pressure to begin to scale back and pull back and get their fiscal houses back into order. So I'm pretty optimistic that we're going to see that private sector investment flow in, and that governments are going to welcome it and see it as a necessity.
I agree with that 100%, Mark. Look, infrastructure is inevitable. It's a rising tide that keeps going as the global population grows and people urbanize and assets need renewal and so on. The delay or any gap that we might have experienced is just going to create a pent-up demand. And of course, it cannot be done by government alone. Government and private sector are tackling this pandemic together, whether it's dealing with a vaccine or keeping the economy moving, and we will tackle the infrastructure together. And that's essentially the essence of P3s.
And I'll join the group of optimists, I think, on this panel to say I think infrastructure, yes, has a long-term history, has a long-term value in the economy, and it will be key to the recovery. So I expect sustained momentum in the sector. I think we may be doing different projects. I mean, the rural internet, for example, that wasn't positive before, but I think we'll continue to do the things that we have been doing for a long time, like urban transit. I think it just has to keep going. We may see, to Steve's point about a return to the old normal, that would be lovely, but we may see it's a slightly different new normal. And I don't mean anything radical by that, but I think there may be some tailoring around the edges and some innovations. And so I'm particularly keen to see what the Canada Infrastructure Bank will be doing in the next couple of years, because it might have been seen as a curiosity 2 or 3 years ago, but it may be a good idea whose time has now come, where there's going to be a different mix of public and private sector capital in some of these projects. We'll see how it shakes out, but I agree with Steve, it cannot be 100% or 85% public capital for too much longer. We're just going to have to find a different way to finance this, and there's lots of private capital available. Just have to find the right place for it.
I definitely share the optimism. I think that we haven't seen a slowdown in the projects. We've seen a continuance, so we expect that. On the question of competitivity, the teams that are in the market right now, they're top tier, they're the cream of the crop. They'll continue to be competitive as always. Some of the long-term effects on the infrastructure industry from COVID may actually just speed up where they were leaning towards already implementing modular, because it made sense in quality, it made sense where it made sense in quality and schedule. So we're going to expect to see more of that. We think it'll speed it up. Site safety, construction contractors, it's the number one thing that they hope for in a successful project. It's their number one test. And I think that they're going to increase that now with sanitation and improved sanitation on the sites. And then technology, we're going to see a lot more technology used on these projects. We had seen the beginning of that, and we're going to expect to see it sped up. As for the competitiveness, again, the impacts of COVID were like a bell curve really on the industry. They were definitely a lot hotter around April, and they're diminishing over time as people become more comfortable with them and they know how better to manage them. So as long as the risk allocation is maintained appropriately, as unforeseen pandemics, epidemics are kept with the authority who's best able to manage that rather than the private sector, I think that we'll see a lot of positive movement in infrastructure.
You know, it's interesting you raised so many points that I'd just like to take a moment to come back to some of them. As you know, we're going to hear from Canada's Minister of Infrastructure and Communities in a few moments. I'm pretty sure that she's going to make reference to the Canada Infrastructure Bank. As I think we certainly know here in Canada, the bank has just announced a $10 billion growth plan. We'll hear more about that, both from the minister, but also there'll be a session with the Canada Infrastructure Bank over the course of the next couple of days. So that'll be very interesting. And Marie, you flagged a number of issues which are really critical to the sector. You know, the construction sector has probably been the laggard when it comes to adopting technology relative to other sectors of the economy, but that's a changing world too, because as governments become more and more committed to getting infrastructure built quicker and better, technology is going to be at the core of that. So again, we've got a session over the next couple of days that's going to focus on that. So quite interesting, quite timely. And the other reality too, that while we're talking certainly about P3s, even what constitutes a P3 is evolving these days. Mm-hmm. And there are new and innovative financing structures out there that governments are introducing that are maybe P3 version 2.0, who knows, right? But they're things like the alliance model, integrated project development, other innovative financing models that are only enhancing government's ability, I believe, to deliver quality infrastructure that gets the very best return for folks like you and me, right? And in the end, it is so much about infrastructure as a driver of quality of life. And that comes back to your point, Steve, that, boy, do we need a shot in the arm when it comes to quality of life these days. So I think that's an encouraging thing too. So I know I have a bias, but I think the conference program itself lends itself to addressing many of these issues. And the answers aren't easy, but you know, we've got the opportunity to debate these concepts through a pretty ambitious Q&A facility also for all the sessions. So I'm hoping that people will come away from the 2 or 3 days that they're spending with us saying that was really interesting. And these Canadians, they're on top of all this stuff, right? So that's very cool too. So I'd like to thank the four of you for your contribution today. I mean, a really interesting conversation. It's tough to have a fireside chat with no fireside and a little distance on the chat. So again, we're trying hard through the design of the program to make sessions more engaging, more innovative, a little bit of fun. So thank you for setting the scene for us with this opening news desk. And we'll come back to the news desk over the course of the next couple of days, again, to address topical issues at the moment. So thank you again, news desk panelists. Looking forward to seeing you over the course of the next 2 or 3 days. Next up,
Thanks, Mark.
you're welcome. Good to see you guys.